application, you have to recollect what is single page and what are all the advantages we are getting when we are using single page application. So whenever we are launching, we will get only
only one load
web page, which can be index.html. Yes, Rusikesh, I saw you. I will update your attendance.
Okay.
And the word is not new to you. Since we are in recap, I would like to discuss on the word framework. So framework, API, followed with libraries. I have introduced a lot from Java. So why we call Angular as a framework?
Because it has
By the way, what is framework? Yes, Abdul.
Front end part design.
because the code reusability is
Frameworks will give you code reusability. I
Yes,
agree. But in general, if there is a question arise, what is framework? Why are we using frameworks? Why are we using Angular framework, Spring framework?
It's
To provide the basic structure for the
Can do it.
development.
Correct.
Angular provides us with lots of components which helps in
Correct.
styling different elements.
Correct. So this point I have mentioned in various scenarios. It's simple thing. If I want to develop a web application without using any framework, it may take 6 months. If I use framework, I can develop within 2 months. Why? The idea behind is always. So framework is gonna to act like a platform for anything, for software development. It can be any type of software. It can be core console application, or it can be web, it can be services, anything. The speciality of framework is, so framework consists of n number of predefined libraries. We can call it as libraries, we can call it as API, we can call it as what? Since we are in OOPS, we can relate with what? Predefined classes. Those classes consist of what? Methods. Those functionalities, methods can achieve in giving the reusability feature. Of course, Angular is also a framework. So that is why we are installing a server-side Node.js. On top of Node.js, we have an installation command. We will install Angular CLI, the latest development component of Angular. On top of it, we achieve all the predefined functionalities. And why we are going for Angular? One main reason is Angular frameworks will give you a single page application. So whatever the real world application we are dealing, every day we are in Gmail, we are using n number of applications, starting from Netflix, Amazon, day to day. All the application falls under single page application, where irrespective of n number of components, content, everything is going to be collected and it will be placed on one single web page. So whenever there you want to fetch any content, the respective component alone will be refreshed, reloaded, not the entire web page. So by the way, we are gonna to achieve web application more faster based on the client requirement and of course, I am gonna to get the reactive application. And one advantage of this Angular framework is, apart from achieving code reusability, your web application will be faster. And it is, of course, dynamic, and it will be giving you a reactive page. We are talking about client's point of view. In server side, of course, it reduces the load of server. Most of the time, whenever if you want the default home component, it will be reside on client machine itself. Whenever there is a dynamic change content, it is required to refresh or fetch the content from server. Is that clear? Any point you want to add? Shall I get into the next phase of introduction? Of course, one another point. So Angular will gives you a loosely coupled structure. So, and it is easy to understand, and all the theory point will applicable, and it is easy to maintain. Of course, because of this framework structure, we can reuse it in a number of applications. So what is required when we want to develop an Angular application? In order to develop Angular application, Angular projects, what is the base requirement?
We need to install
Node.js.
Node.js.
So we should have Node.js. So step number 1, we need to install Node.js. So it provides all your installation tool, which wants to build your Angular project. Apart from that, many more. And what is a command we used? We can develop an Angular from scratch. Also,
CLI.
CLI.
using CLI. So we will use the command after installing Node. So by default, nodes come with iEnrich Node package manager, so which will gives all your server side functionality. One functionality is your Angular. So you can install either by using global Angular CLI consists of all the pre-packed libraries, and this is the latest one. So either you can develop your Angular, you can design an Angular application project from scratch by creating each and every page which is required to build your application, starting from the tsconfig, package.json, and your components. Instead, everything will be built with the help of one single command by using your CLI. And what is the latest version of Angular? Starting from Angular JS version 2.4.5, and the latest is some last month, a month back, they released 14 version. So 12, 13, 14, 14 is a version, a recent version of Angular. They have released last month, not even 1 month older. All right. So after installing Angular project, what is the first topic we discussed on Angular?
components.
What is the speciality of component?
And it consists of HTML, CSS, and TS file. We can index.html. We can put that
Yes.
components inside index.html.
It can act like a parent and child. We can share the data between components.
No. Wait, we'll go one by one. My question is, those functionality data sharing between one component and another component.
Predefined
Go one
code.
by one.
Like you
As
don't
soon
want
as-
to refresh the entire page. You can like press the
The
component.
concept of single page application has been achieved only with the help of components. The entry point or the launching page of my Angular is index.html. In index.html, we are calling the parent component as AppRoot. The building block of Angular application is component. So we have a default component which is AppRoot. So which is nothing but our app component. So app component is our TypeScript file. It will render and it will replace. Whenever I'm loading app component.ts, it will replace the respective content of HTML with the help of selector. Selector is used to replace wherever I am using this selector name, app-root. This is the name of my component, I can say indirectly. whenever we are using selector name, wherever I am using selector, component can be called only with the help of open close tag. Don't confuse with component and directive. So component and directive. So what is this also I have noticed majorly on Saturday. So if I have component 1, so let's assume my component 1 and our root. So we will call with selector name, and it is a separate HTML file. So we will call with open close tag. What about directive? So we have structural directive, we have attribute directive, and we have component directive. So component directive alone, you will be using this open and close tag. There will be an open tag, you will use the selector name. Whenever if you are using the selector name, it will be replaced with the HTML content of respective template URL. And you can relate with the word attribute with your HTML attribute. So you remember when I started with HTML, in order to show you an idea about attribute, I have introduced marquee tag. What are all the attributes I have used in marquee tag?
Up, down, left,
Direction.
direction.
You remember, in order to change the direction, I used the attribute called as direction up. What else? My idea is not to teach marquee. I just want to mention what is this component tag, other one is attribute directive. You remember I used to scroll amount, speed. The amount of speed my marquee element tag content will use to display on my HTML. Apart from that, we will use an event also, on mouse over, on mouse out. When I place a mouse cursor on it, this has to stop. Okay, again, I'm repeating, my idea is not to teach marquee tag. So what technically, what we will call as direction, scroll amount, on mouse over?
Attribute.
Attributes.
So all of you, please pay attention. Technically, marquee is an HTML element, tag. In this tag, we will use an attribute. Direction is an attribute. Scroll amount is an attribute. On mouse over is an attribute. So we will use an attribute name and we will replace with some values if it is required. So if I use structural directive will be prefixed with asterisk notation, ng for asterisk. Or else let me use ng if, which will hold true, false. If I created check structural directive, let it be check 1. So I will be using asterisk check 1. So directive needs to be used as a name. Directive name, directive selector name. Don't confuse, don't use check 1, which is incorrect. So directive, structural directive will be prefixed with asterisk. Attribute directive will not prefix with asterisk. Let it be focus 1. I have created focus 1, that's all. This focus 1 attribute will be applied to my component, to my element. So instead, let me use it for my any of the tag. So whatever the attributes I applied, all these are attributes which will be used along with my HTML element. Whereas components are the building block of your Angular project. So which is essentially used to achieve the core concept of Angular, which is single page application. In a project, you will be having n number of components. If you feel certain component on my page needs to be refreshed, then you split it and put it as a separate component. Component can be included. So initially you will include your app root component in your index.html. You no need to make any changes in your index.html. Whatever the functionality you want to add, you add it in your app component.typescript file. And this app component.typescript file will automatically render the HTML whatever the HTML path you have placed in your template URL. So this is a predefined component which is available in your Angular project. So apart and whatever the functionality, the code we are doing, everything will be under SRC app folder. So by default, you have SRC app folder under app component.html. Apart from that, it is required to generate n number of user-defined components. So we will generate user-defined component by the command
GC component name.
What is a command? Okay, whomsoever I am calling, you tell me. So, Priya, what is a command to generate component?
G.
Hmm. Complete it, make it fast, dear. Abhilash, Priya, come on, make it fast.
Ma'am, can I?
Generate component name, ma'am.
So, Priya, make a note of everything. We will use ng generate or ng gc component and your component name. Apart from that, what are all the generate command we have used?
Generate library.
Library.
So we used to generate library. And then
Module.
Directive.
so whenever if you generate a component, so by default in your Angular, component will be generated with 4 files and its own folder. So it will generate a folder with your component name and 4 files will be generated. I'm sure you are familiar with all the 4 files. One is your core programming file, TypeScript file, source file. And in order to indicate your TypeScript class, it is a component. We will add up, it will automatically add up with a decorator at component. I will come to decorator topic. So by default, your TypeScript is an entry point. It is your source file. So in order to indicate this class, this layout component 1, it's a class. So this class is a component. I want to indicate to my machine, else how my machine will understand this is a component and it will add all the information related to component. So that functionality can be added in Angular with the help of decorator. So component decorator, and it is available under that Angular core library, and by default it comes with certain properties. When I use component, all the predefined methods, metadata, all the functionality of component will be added in my layout 1 component. Apart from that, so it will come with parenthesis component. You can act like it takes some default properties. One property is selector, the other one is template URL and style URLs. So by the way, it is, you can give multiple styles, and please look into the syntax. So everything is a string value, selector name and template. What is the difference between the syntax and template URL and style URL?
Style is an array.
Why it is an array?
Because we can have more than one style.
One style files you can attach. So it comes as an array, open, close, square bracket. And it's a class, it's a TypeScript class. We all know that we are into OOPS. So it's a class, for sure we want to use it in another class. So use export. So by default, whenever I am loading this component, certain functionality needs to be initiated. So that you can provide under onInit method. So in order to use onInit, you have to implement onInit. It's an interface. So the difference between constructor and ng on it is, so constructor will be triggered whenever if you are instantiating with object. Whereas whenever I'm loading this component for the first time when it gets instantiated. So init, whenever it is init for the first time, ng on it will happen. This is only once. Whereas constructor, as many number of times you are creating an object, constructor block will be called automatically. So we started with component. So of course, so we need to have a communication between my source, my TypeScript file and HTML. So if I want to pass the data between TypeScript and HTML, only this HTML is going to generate on my output. So in order to generate the content, whatever I want to, whatever I am passing from my TypeScript, my data needs to be displayed in my HTML. So in order to pass data from TypeScript and capture in HTML, we have the concept called as, the first topic we discussed in component is data binding. So from TypeScript file, the data needs to be bound on my HTML because HTML is going to act like my view component. So if I pass the data from TypeScript to HTML, this is called as one-way binding. How we can achieve one-way binding?
Using property bindings.
Interpolation.
Interpolation.
Property
So
binding.
one is by using property binding, square bracket we will use, the other one is interpolation. So apart from that,
Event binding.
so if I want to pass the data both from TypeScript, I want to pass to HTML. Again, whatever I captured from HTML, from user, if I capture any data, I want to send to TypeScript. Again, from there, the same thing is going to display on my view. How it is possible? Two-way binding.
Property model.
ng model. If I want to use ng model, what we need to import?
Model.
Forms module.
Forms module in your app module.ts. So it is acting like a configuration file. Whatever the functionality I'm using in my project, everything needs to be declared and the packages are to be imported. So we started with one-way binding and then we went on two-way binding where I captured some employee record. And then along with that, I introduced one class. So one model class and no persistent. So only some dummy data from array, and we used certain model class because if I want to define mixed data type, I can use my model class. So we had a model class and we defined an array of the type with respective to model class, some mock data, and we binded on our HTML via our TypeScript. Again, whatever we are capturing on HTML, so we again, the type of the data is the respective model class and via TypeScript object. Again, we displayed the same in our HTML by using ng model forms module. Can you recollect those? What is that? Employee data, student data, product data on very first day. July 19th, demo 1. Make a note of it. Even if you feel like you want to do it again, please do it. So on first day when I introduced, I started with component 1. I started displaying employee ID and employee name through interpolation. Same employee ID we used to property binding and we displayed the data. And if I have an array data, I can use structural directive ng4 and I can display all the data. So these are all the direct values available in your TypeScript file. I'll show you. Employee ID, employee name, student details. So employee ID, employee name and student detail is an array. So then I introduced user defined type, which is product class. So we created a product class with mixed set of data. Define a constructor is mandatory for your class, and we placed some mock data. And this mock data, it's an array, belongs to the type user defined product, not number array, not string array. In order to use product details in our TypeScript file, what is the very first step? How can I use an array located in different class, different file in your another TypeScript file? Step number 1.
We need to import.
Import, ma'am.
Remember, we need to import files, even though it is in the same folder. So we referred that array. Here, see, it is an array. The array is located in some other file name. In your TypeScript, you have to define a variable or a property. And memory allocation remains same. Whatever the memory allocated by product details, same memory will be shared by my product 1. So, two-way binding, I introduced a text box. Remember, we introduced a text box. Whatever the data I'm entering on the text box, I need to store it in my object, new product dot, and my key is product ID. So we used what? NG model. It is going to act like both property binding and event binding. That is why we are using both the symbol. So where the data will be stored, it will be stored in an object, new product, product ID. So we need to have new product object. And whenever I am performing a button click event, so it's an event, and we are handling an event using this function 1. The new product is an object. Whenever I'm clicking this function 1, the new product is pushing in my array product 1, which we created some time back. And we are releasing the memory of new product so that the new value will be stored. And whenever I'm selecting any of my list, the respective data needs to be displayed. So for that, we used selected product object. And it is also an object of product class. So whenever I'm selecting any item on my list, the respective item object alone will be stored in my selected product, and then we are displaying. So these are the topics we discussed on one-way binding and two-way binding. And you can have n number of components. So whenever I'm clicking any of the product on my table, so it has to go to onSelect method where I am passing the selected X object, and that I'm displaying. So you can display here. You can also display in another component. And what is the next topic? So I'll be having many components. Of course, data needs to share from
one component to another component.
one component to another component. So wherever if you feel like the component, the data needs to be refreshed, you can place it in one component, another component. So you can call another component in your so wherever you are calling. So we started with app component. App is a parent. So my component 1. If I am in my component 1, if I want to call my component 2, so we will be using the selector name. So in component 1, I am calling component 2. So if I am calling component 2 in component 1, my component 2 is going to act like a child component. Component 1 is going to act like a parent component. So how to pass the data from component 1 to component 2?
At the directive,
Input output directly.
Input
That input-
decorator.
In
decorator.
There we introduced a decorator, input and output.
app module key.
AppMod.ts.
So I pass the data from component 2 to component 3. So in component 2, I need to call component 3. So if I want to pass the data, from component 2 to component 3, we will use property binding. we will use a property name and data will be binder. This can be any data. It should be there in your TypeScript file. So I'm passing the data using the property K1. This K1 you will capture in component 3 with the help of at input decorator. This K1, it can be any type. So likewise from here, if you want to pass the data from component 3 to component 1, it is possible only with the help of event binding using event emitter class. So at output, we are defining an event emitter, and whatever we want to emit, we will use an emit method and we will pass the data. And this will be passed and will be captured in your parent component using event binding. Whatever I emitted, it will be captured under $event. So it's an event. So you can use a function and you can capture whatever it is emitted from child. And you can display here.
Ma'am,
Hmm.
while working on this particular topic, I faced a common error like this is not a known property of this component. Can you please explain that?
If it is telling this is not a known property of this component, that means if it is occurs for this message from child, 13th line, then you don't have this property in your TypeScript file. If it occurs in this K2, if it occurs for K2, K2 is not available in my app component 3. The property is not available.
Okay.
That is why you are getting the error. So this is with respective to its own TypeScript file, component 2. But K2 and K1 with respective to child component. Your child also should have K1. You will get that error in that meantime.
Yes, it was saying for the parent component. For the parent component, the property is
So
missing.
once if you complete and if you build, you will not get that error.
Okay.
All right. That's what I told. So whatever the small topics we are discussing, do it with a simple demo. Then if you apply to your sprint, then you will feel easy and you can able to go with the flow. So what is the next topic? And then only we introduced library. So in library or only we spend a lot of time. Why we want to have library component rather than a regular component?
For publishing.
So if I want to publish globally on your NPM JS, I cannot publish my regular component. I can publish only my library component. So ng generate library, it is also a component. This component alone needs to be published. So I'm sure we have done with step-by-step publishing. So after publishing, this can be reused globally anywhere. So with not only in your project, it can be to any project. So we will generate a library and there will not be no HTML file. If required, please add HTML file and modify your template URL. Whatever the functionality you want, you do it with your respective to your template library, your template URL of the respective HTML file. So what happened in sprint 1 is, so they want us to use our project app component as our parent. So and we want to create password library as our child. And this password component they want to create as a library. And app component will pass. I have discussed this a lot of time. Minimum and maximum will be passed from parent to child. And child will capture minimum and maximum. Child will have a text box button and child will return error messages. So this is what they want. I hope as of now, all of you have completed this first sprint. Guys, can you relate? So what happened in first sprint is they want you to create 2 components. And the second component will be the child, but that should be not a regular component. It should be a library component. And library will get minimum and maximum as input. It will do all validation and it will return error message. This error message needs to be captured by parent and it can use. So that's what I told. If you are in, for example, login page. So if you are, if it is in login of nit.com. It can be facebook.com login. Can I use both nit.com, facebook.com component? Can use this password library? Is it possible?
Yes, ma'am.
Both can use once if you create and publish. For example, NIT, they want minimum 6 and maximum 12, but Facebook, they want minimum 4 and maximum as some 20. So this is what the ideology behind this password validator library component. Guys, still having any doubt? Hi, Vishal, what happened?
I'm looking for my learners here.
Whomsoever is joining, if I found them, I will send to breakout room.
Okay, okay.
Nobody
Okay.
there.
Okay.
Those ILP learners are not here. Guys, please give me the confirmation that you have understood the sprint one ideology and you have implemented.
Ma'am, I have one question.
Hmm.
Ma'am, when we publish a library, so the only the password library got published and not
Correct.
the app component.
No, app is your project. You can use it for anything. Let's assume we 35 are there. So we all 35, if I want to use password library, is it possible? Simply I want to add, if it is library hyphen password validator, that's all, story over. This is the idea behind. If I have some 35 projects, all 35 can use this library by only passing, don't forget. So you have to pass, if it is minimum, you need to pass minimum some values, maximum some values, story over.
So that minimum and maximum will only be manipulated by the publisher and not the user.
User. This attribute name remains same. Whatever we are defining at input decorator, the same property name you have to use. All 35 of us in our project, we want to have this password text box and we want to ensure that it should fall under certain range of values. Instead of creating a text box button validation, simply add this line, story over, wherever you want. Reusable. If I have login page, in login page, inside wherever I want to place a password, I will add this tag, that's all. Guys, please give me the confirmation. Shall I move next?
Yes, ma'am.
Niranjan, Priya,
Yes, ma'am.
are you with me?
Yes,
Okay. What is
ma'am.
the next topic we discussed after validation? This is all our fourth sprint. What is the next topic we discussed after?
Post listener.
Directives.
So directives. Yeah. So before directives, yeah. So I think directive I introduced on Friday. So let me introduce a small recap on decorators. So in order to use decorators, so by the way, decoratives is one feature in TypeScript. So certain functionality that I want to add in my class, certain predefined functionality. Certain predefined functionality, if I want to add it in my class, in my TypeScript class. So what is this predefined functionality means? We are in object-oriented language. I want all of you to answer for certain functionalities I want to add or use in my class. What will be the certain functionality?
Classes, methods.
Classes, methods, certain members of class, properties. Certain predefined properties, members, methods of a class, or in another technical term, we call it as some metadata information. If I want to add it in my TypeScript, we will use decorators. Always decorators will come with at annotation. And in order to use decorator, this is what the day one problem we had. So if you look into your Angular project, you will find configuration file. So if you look into the configuration file, you remember when we introduced creating an Angular application from scratch, I want all of you to add this property in your TS config. You remember?
Yes, ma'am.
So read the tooltip message. Enable experimental decorators. If I want to enable this decorator functionalities in my Angular, we need to enable this property. Since in day one, we have not created Angular, why we don't get this TS config. Even though the built-in TS config I enable to edit, that is why you remember at sealed functionality, at sealed. So today I will have some time in the evening. We will have time. Let's discuss on that sealed functionality. So we want this property to be true. So then only I can use this annotation. So what are all the decorators we have used? We used a few decorators. I just wanted to classify into certain order. In TypeScript, we have 4 types of decorators, starting from class decorator. What is this? Property decorator. And nothing is new. We came across with all the topic. Method decorator. And the 4th one is parameter decorator. This alone we will discuss on tomorrow. So tell me, what are all the decorators I defined on top of my class? So top level for a particular class. You can look into the code and you can give a try.
Add component.
Add component.
Add input, add
So
output.
before
Add
class.
in.
So top level. So for a particular class. So this is a class. So if I define before my class certain metadata information or certain functionality to be added. So these are all called as class decorator. As of now, we came across on 2 decorators, 2 class decorators. What are all that?
Add component and add direct.
Can you see? So we came across on add component and add directive. Also, you recollect and tell me. Guys, anything you noticed? Where is my class? App module class. So before my class, what decorator we have used?
ng
module.
Add ng module.
So I can say, see here, decorator that marks ng module and supplies all the configuration metadata. So I can say, so these are the examples of class decorators. So which will be defined on top of my class. It's a top level decorator. Before defining a class, before my compiler comes to the definition of class, it will take the features. It will consider this as a component class. It will consider the respective TypeScript as ng module and directive. Can you relate? So some certain metadata information will be added. So when it comes to definition of class, before defining, it will import all the functionality and it will add the decorator and it will add the respective metadata information. Always decorator will comes as a method type. Can you notice this open and close? So always wherever I use decorator, it comes with open close. Here it is an object type. Inside object type, we have a key and values, and this is many values, so array. Whereas if you go to your app component, it's an again it is an object type holding key and value. If it is many value, we will use the square bracket array indication. Is that clear? So property. So if I want to include certain property within a class, what do you mean by the word property in TypeScript? Tell me, do you find any property in this class?
Any data of any property.
Data and title.
So data is a
Data
property.
Title.
Title is a property. So both the property, if I have certain function, let's assume there is a function. All these are members. All the three are members of class. Out of that, these two were properties. And this is a method. So if I allow any of the decorator with specific property within our class, inside a class, if I use certain, I'll show you. Let me go to class. So inside a class, if I use above the class, it is class decorator. Inside the class, if I use any decorator, falls under the category property decorator. So can you see any of the property decorator inside the class?
K1.
K1,
At
K2
input, at
are
output.
property of class.
Class.
We are talking about property decorator. Do we have
That is-
anything inside the class? Come on,
That is-
guys. Let's assume if I give roll number equal to 1001, student name is equal to Abdul. These two falls under the category properties.
Property.
Not only these two, starting from 9th line to 39th line, everything is what? Members. Out of that, if members are holding a value, it is property. So this roll number, name are called as property. Whereas the topic is
Property decorator.
property decorator. The property, along with that, we have @ symbol. Can you find anything? Inside a class, do you have anything with @ symbol?
Yes, ma'am.
And these two are familiar to us. What is that?
At input at output.
So I can say @ input and output are property decorators. Why? Because it is inside a class. It is going to act like a property of a class. So for a specific property, so for K1, I'm going to apply. See here, roll number is a property. Student name is a property. K1 is also a property. All of you agree?
Yes,
ma'am.
K1, K2,
Yes, ma'am.
all are property of class. Child function is a function. So out of 4 property, K1, K2 alone will be prefixed with @ input and @ output. These two are called as property decorator. Is that clear? So if it is defined above the class decorator, these 4 are property. Out of 4 property, 2 properties has been prefixed with @ annotation. some functionality I'm indicating. So if it is at input, I'm going to get the input from parent component. So input and output falls under the category property decorator, because before property, I'm going to use this annotation. 1 second. All right. See here, before class, before variable. So in terms, we can say, what is this? Any idea for method decorator? Used for class property. Guys, come on. The decorator which is used inside a method. Do we use any decorator inside method? I'll show you. Do we use any decorator
Host
before
listener.
method?
Host listener.
All of you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
That's all. So used inside method of class. So at host listener, at host binding. So moving to the next, parameter decorator. So which is used as a parameter inside a class. So this we will, all these things we came across. This alone we will discuss on tomorrow. And we will use injectable. So particularly injectable is used for services. So we will use alt injectable to inject the service inside the class. The service part we will cover tomorrow. So is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
It's Monday morning, long day, many days to go. So then we introduced directive. Why are we going for directive? Do directive will change the logical behavior, business style?
No,
The
ma'am.
last topic, I'm talking about Friday topic. So we had structural directive, attributes, and apart from the component, we discussed only structural and attribute. Do anything related with what is that? Behavioral part, logical part with directive. With directive, can I able to pull the value from database, pull the value from server? Nothing. Directives are responsible for what?
Adding and removing.
Directives simply say these are all instructions to
DOM.
DOM element. So we will use div. Please understand the functionalities of Angular. So nothing to do with the logical behavior or functionality with directive. So directives are instruction to DOM. And so when I use structural directive will instruct a DOM to display its corresponding inner elements or not. So the best example is ngFor. I'm sorry, ngIf. ngFor also. If I give true, so whatever inside my div tag will be displayed. If it is false, it will not display. Same thing we achieved with the help of our own directive. Check one. How we achieved ngIf? By using two reference class. What are all the class? Whomsoever I'm asking, please tell me. Sodit?
Yes, ma'am.
So we achieved ngIf structural directive by our own directive by using two references. What are all those?
Yes. Ma'am, our class is check one, which is created direct.
We achieve the functionality of ngIf by using two reference. Yes, Ayush.
And view container ref.
So we achieved the same using two class. One is template ref, the other one is view container ref. So this div falls under the category.
Ma'am, container.
View container.
So this is view container. This paragraph falls under the category
Template ref.
template ref. So initially we are clearing view container, and once if it is true, if check one data value is true, we are embedding this template ref inside our view container by using create embedded view. Once if the value is true, then in my view container, I'm creating an embedded view and I'm adding this temp ref. So we are achieving the same concept of if ngIf by using our own directive. So this is a structural directive, so it will be prefixed with asterisk notation. Same thing you can achieve with ng template. See, this we are not doing. When it comes to compilation, our environment will compile like this. You go ahead with asterisk notation. So structural directives are responsible of displaying, viewing the element or hidden. Your element needs to be hidden on my DOM. Structural directive is responsible for visible or hidden of my DOM element. Attribute is what attribute does?
Style, ma'am.
Attribute is responsible for styling our DOM. So again, you can achieve styling by adding the respective attribute. It's an attribute you can use. Let's assume my attribute 1. That's all. If I add this, the respective functionality will be added. Either you can pass with value or you don't need to pass with the value. Depend upon the definition you are making. So whenever if you are performing any event, if it is click event, on mouse over, on mouse out, see, if it is view output element, on mouse over and in. If it is input element, you can use mouse enter and mouse out. Apart from that, few more events also there. I shared you in Mentor Notes channel for your self-understanding of events. So as of now, we came across on few events. See here, if I add my attribute 1, whatever the event associated with my paragraph in my attribute 1, the respective functionality will be added. So for that, we created focus directive. So we created focus directive. If I add app focus 1, so it will host binding is with respective to the element. The element will be bind to the respective events with the help of host binding and binding my background color. So when I use app focus 1 selector on my paragraph, and if I perform any event, the appropriate functionality will get triggered. So if I mouse entered on my paragraph, my BG color will be green. If I keep focus on my text box, VG color. So event listener will listen to the event and it performs the appropriate functionality defined in my handler. So everything happens with the help of what? Attribute. An attribute can be referred with the help of directive selector name. For whichever the DOM element, if I use the app focus 1, so wherever it can be paragraph, label, text box, div tag, span tag, wherever I use this directive attribute, this selector name, with respective to event, the appropriate functionality will perform. So this is what we discussed on Friday. Same thing you can achieve with styles also. So other than that, we also have this directive asterisk for structural. Simply if you give this name app focus 1, it is attribute directive. Asterisk for structural. So if you give this name alone, so even if I don't give also, the respective functionality will happen because we gave default colors. I shared a few more events. So please go through the same, and I'm giving you another 10 minutes time. It's 10:20 in my clock. 10:30, I'll start with the next topic. So we'll start with the topic, then we'll continue on these demos. So before that, quickly recap. So we tried an attribute directive for style.background color. So instead you want to apply transition, and by giving the scale property, we gave color. Instead of color, if you provide scale value, the zoom over will happen. Wherever we are. So guys, I need 1 minute time. So before that, you recap the topic quickly, wherever you